The atmosphere inside the concert dome of Virex 7 was heavy with ceremonial tension, though the air itself was sterile and chilled by artificial circulation. Ambassador Kieran Soul stood with his back straight and hands folded, eyes fixed on the figures approaching across the obsidian bridge. They were unlike any species recorded in the Galactic Concordance extensive database. Tall, skeletal beings wrapped in armor that shimmered like oiled shadows, every movement accompanied by the faint hum of hidden machinery. Their leader wore a mask sculpted into the likeness of a predatory skull, ornate but unervingly real, as if carved from something once alive. Kieran had negotiated with warlords, smugglers, artificial intelligences turned sentient gods, but none of them had caused his heart to pound as this delegation did. The way they moved, calculated, predatory, quiet, set off instinctual alarms deep in his bones. He was briefed, of course. He had memorized the protocols, the greetings, the culturally significant gestures painstakingly extracted from fragmented transmissions and intercepted signals. And yet, standing here now, he was no longer certain of anything. To his left, Advisor Thalen muttered, "This feels wrong. They didn't come for peace." "Careful," Kieran replied under his breath. "We're the ones who asked for this meeting." The leader stepped forward, and the rest halted in perfect unison. Without a word, it extended a gauntlet hand, claws glinting under the crystalline lighting. Kieran mirrored the gesture with a flat palm greeting of the Concordant, lowering his gaze as instructed. But then, only for a moment, Thalen flinched. A twitch, a breath held too long. And it was enough. The sound that followed wasn't sound at all, but a deep-frequency resonance that rattled through the dome, shaking lights and causing every translation device in the room to stutter. One of the alien guards moved. Kieran saw it too late. Thalen had instinctively reached for the pistol at his side, breaking every protocol, and the alien had responded with blinding speed. A blur of energy, a scream cut short, blood and circuitry on the polished floor. The dome exploded into chaos. Security teams surged in, but the alien delegation was gone, vanished without trace, as if they had dissolved into the shadows. Kieran stood in the center, untouched but hollow, as the silence that followed pressed down like gravity. Thalen's body twitched once more, then was still. "They saw it as a declaration of war," whispered Commander Lisa Vorn, arriving beside him, rifle in hand. "We're not getting another meeting." Kieran didn't speak. His thoughts spiraled, replaying the second that changed everything. This wasn't just a failed negotiation. It was the spark that would ignite something far beyond their control. Within hours, the footage had circulated across the net. Some saw it as a betrayal. Others, a justified retaliation. But one thing was universally agreed upon. The species, now identified by scattered fragments as Acarant, were not to be trifled with. Reports followed swiftly. A mining colony on Jirwin, 5 went dark. A Concordant patrol ship sent a garbled distress signal before it was swallowed in a burst of static. On the edge of the Traken belt, entire settlements went silent. The pattern was too fast, too calculated. These weren't retaliatory strikes. They were executions. Kieran was summoned before the Concordant High Council, not as a hero or diplomat, but as the man whose mission had unraveled the veil between peace and annihilation. The chamber, a hemispherical arena of cold metal and observation tiers, was quieter than usual. No gavel sounded. No preamble was offered. "You were trusted with an unparalleled first contact," Chancellor Direct said, his voice like sand through iron. "You have instead invited extinction." "I followed every directive," Kieran said, voice tight. "It was a misinterpretation." "No," interrupted General Koresh, slamming her metal fist on the armrest of her seat. "It was a failure to understand the scale of what we were dealing with. You walked into the Predator's den with a gift basket and a prayer. They didn't come in peace either." Kieran snapped, the control in his voice beginning to crack. "They came to weigh us, and now they've found us wanting." Silence again. No one argued. Later, in the shadows of his quarters aboard the Aegis Dawn, Kieran reviewed the only useful data left from the encounter, high-resolution scans of the Acarant armor, partial biological readings, and a voice print from the sound they emitted. He stared into the still image of their leader, the one with a bone mask and eyes like polished onyx. Something cold twisted in his stomach. He activated the AI interface. Aster, run a check on all known conflicts with unidentified species matching these signatures. A few moments passed. Then, one match found. Level 9 restriction. Clearance denied. Kieran's breath caught. Level 9 was classified above his rank, and most others. He tapped into his emergency credentials, ones buried so deep they bypassed protocol through legal ambiguity in the Concordance founding articles. The file opened. It was centuries old. A failed expedition in the spiral arm. One surviving message fragment. We disturbed something ancient. Not conquerors. Not saviors. Apex predators. Do not engage. If encountered, run. The timestamp was 200 years ago. He closed the file and stared out the viewport, watching the stars drift like distant embers. There was no misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't war. This was a warning long ignored. A species that did not conquer planets. They harvested threats. They had waited in the dark, and now, provoked, they would purge the galaxy of anything that moved against them. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. Commander Vorn requesting entry, Aster announced. Let her in. Lisa stepped inside, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes grim. Jerwin, 5 wasn't the end. They're hitting trade routes, picking off ships, using some kind of cloaking tech we can't even trace. Any survivors? None. Just wreckage and silence. Kieran nodded slowly. Then it's begun. She hesitated. The Council wants to retaliate. Preemptive strike. He scoffed. They think missiles will scare a species that erases civilizations like smudges on glass. They want you to lead it. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who broke the galaxy would now be asked to save it. Kieran walked his console and activated a map of the known systems. Entire sectors shimmered red. Vanished colonies, compromised relay stations, ghost ships adrift in silence. What if we don't fight back? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Lisa stared at the map, jaw set. Then we vanish, one by one. Kieran took a long breath, then keyed in a sequence. Tactical displays unfolded, projections of fleet movements, rally points, classified intel. Prepare the dawn, he said, and notify the outer colonies. If war has come, then we fight in the light. And in the silence that followed, the stars blinked back at him like a million watching eyes. A war had begun, not by declaration, not by treaty broken, but by instinct, ancient and cold. And somewhere in the void, the Carent waited, not to win, but to finish what had once been started. End of Section 1. Word count, 1 for 90. Let me know if you'd like to jump into Section 2 or expand any characters or lore. The briefing chamber aboard the Aegis Dawn buzzed with voices. Too many, too loud. Kieran's soul stood at the center, surrounded by a mix of military brass, scientific advisors, and diplomatic liaisons from half a dozen species. Some had been pulled out of retirement. Others barely survived their last mission. None had ever encountered anything like the Carent. A translucent projection hovered above them, slowly rotating. A map of concordant space riddled with red nodes. Dozens of systems had gone dark, not just silenced, erased. No debris, no signals, just absence. Entire planets reduced to memory. We can't form a front line if there's no front, barked Admiral Reveth, her tusked features twisted in frustration. They strike like shadows, vanish like smoke. We're bleeding stars, and we don't even know where the blade is. Which is why we're not thinking big enough, said Lisa Vorn. This isn't a skirmish. It's a pattern. Strategic decapitations of key supply systems, communications, food chains. They're isolating us one system at a time. Kieran hadn't spoken yet. He studied the map in silence, eyes narrowing at the rhythmic precision of the strikes. This wasn't just predatory. It was surgical, deliberate. They're not just killing us, he finally said. They're pruning us, removing our capacity to resist before we even realize what's happening. A silence followed his words, heavy and thick. Then what do we do? Asked Yenamar, a representative from the Zyri hegemony, her crystalline skin glinting faintly. Wait and die. No, said Kieran. We make them bleed. It was easier said than done. The first counteroffensive, Operation Thorns, was a disaster. A fleet of 73 vessels coordinated an ambush near the Vey Corridor, where a Carent vessel had been sighted repeatedly. They laid in wait for 3 days. No movement, no signals. On the 4th, only static. Recon drones found the fleet floating in perfect formation, no visible damage, but every crew member aboard dead, eyes wide with something unspoken. No distress calls. No resistance. Kieran reviewed the feeds himself. The logs ended abruptly, mid-breath, mid-word. Whatever the Carent had done, it had taken the fleet without touching their ships. That terrified the Council more than any battle. Lisa found him later, seated in the ship's observation deck, watching the Vey system star pulse quietly behind the glass. "You're not sleeping," she said, folding her arms. "Neither are you. We lost 6,000 people, Kieran." "We didn't lose them," he said. "We sent them in blind and hoped the enemy would be merciful." Her silence agreed with him. He leaned forward, hands clasped. "We need a new approach. Something they don't expect. You're thinking suicide missions? I'm thinking infiltration." She tilted her head. "Into the Carent? You think we can get close?" "I think we have no other choice." That night, he called in a favor, the kind that required no names, only encrypted codes and a promise never to speak of it again. A former intelligence operative, presumed dead, arrived in orbit 3 days later. His name was Cass Orlin, and he moved like someone who had spent too long around things that couldn't be explained. "I want you to find them," Kieran told him. "Track one of their strike vessels. Get close. Close enough to see how they think." Cass only grinned. "I've tailed gods, Ambassador. What's one more monster?" Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Carent continued to advance. Colonies implemented blackout protocols. Civilian ships were rerouted through increasingly narrow corridors. Misinformation became the first casualty. Rumors of Carent taking prisoners, of cloning crews, of turning minds against themselves. Kieran knew better. They weren't conquerors. They didn't occupy. They cleansed. And still, the Council squabbled. Plans for massive orbital stations. Quantum entanglement arrays. An alliance with the Ern Syndicate, a criminal empire that made no promises but demanded payment in advance. Every day brought another crisis, another system fallen, another message that ended in silence. Then came a signal. Weak, distorted, nearly lost in the background noise of galactic chatter, but unmistakably real. Cass Orlin's voice, encrypted in 6 layers of dead languages. Lisa cracked the code within minutes. "I'm inside," the message said. "One of their ships. Maybe more. It's not metal. It's alive. I don't know how long I can stay hidden, but I'm sending data. They think in frequencies. Not just sound, emotion. They broadcast instinct like sonar." The packet included fragments, visual feeds that didn't make sense, sound that triggered nausea, and biometric data from the ship's walls that registered as neither synthetic nor organic, but something in between. Cass's final message came 2 hours later. "They're not afraid of us. They're afraid of something else." That was it. The packet sent ripples through the Concordant Science Division. For the first time, they had evidence that the Carent weren't omniscient. They feared. They reacted. It was the first opening. Kieran convened a new council, smaller, faster. Not the politicians, not the admirals. Strategists. Survivors. People with nothing to lose. They began mapping emotional frequencies, distortions in Carent attack patterns. It wasn't perfect, but it was a thread. Lisa led the first real counterstrike. A stealth vessel, laced with pulse inhibitors and noise-canceling hull tech, followed a Carent ship to a moon in the shadow of the Hiraxis Nebula. They landed before it did, buried sensors, set traps. When the Carent descended, the team played back frequencies mimicking the ones Cass had recorded, tones of confusion, fear, and dissonance. The Carent hesitated for 10 full seconds. And in that moment, they struck. It wasn't a victory, not truly. Only 2 Carent were killed. The rest retreated. But it was the first wound inflicted, the first time their blood stained soil. Back on the Aegis Dawn, Kieran watched the replay again and again, not for the tactics, but for the hesitation, that flicker, that pause. They can be surprised, he said aloud. They can be manipulated. The war had changed. It was still brutal, still one-sided in too many places. But now, there was a whisper of resistance, guerrilla strikes, sabotage, a hidden fleet assembling in the outer systems, made up of volunteers and defectors. Still, the question gnawed at him. What could a species as advanced, as ruthless, as the Karen possibly fear? He didn't get an answer, but he did receive a transmission. Unmarked, untraceable. It played only once. A voice, distorted yet intelligible. You were not meant to find us. You have become a vector. The purge was never about your war. You have triggered the quarantine. Then silence. And the stars, once again, seemed to watch. End of Section 2. Word count, 1-500. Ready to dive into Section 3, or explore any specific elements in more detail. Kieran's soul stood at the edge of the command deck, eyes fixed on the cascading data streams flowing across the main screen. Outside the viewport, the vast expanse of the nebulous shroud pulsed with slow, eerie light, its gases undulating like the breath of some slumbering beast. Beneath that celestial fog lay the Karen quarantine zone, an area of space deemed off-limits by every major power for centuries. Until now, it had been a footnote in ancient cartography, a don't go here etched in the fine print of stellar maps. Now it was the last known source of the message that had shaken the Concordant to its core. You were not meant to find us. The words echoed endlessly in Kieran's mind. He replayed them in different modulations, ran them through linguistic matrices, tone analyzers, historical encryption scans. Nothing helped. It wasn't a message designed for understanding. It was a warning. Lisa entered without a word, her face pale under the deck's cold lights. She handed him a data card. The scout drone made it back, she said. Barely. I had to override half the failsafes just to get the data to play. He inserted the card into the console. The feed began, a slow rotation through thick fog, then sudden stillness. The nebula cleared for a brief instant, revealing a massive structure. No, a vessel, larger than any station the Concordant had ever built. Its surface shifted like water, its geometry refusing to remain fixed, fractaling and folding in ways that broke the eye's focus. What is that? Kieran whispered. It's alive, Lisa said. That ship, if you can even call it that, isn't a weapon. It's a vault. Or maybe a prison. They stared at it in silence. I think, she said slowly, the Karens aren't just fleeing us. They're running from that. The idea was absurd. Monstrous creatures capable of wiping out entire planets, afraid of something even worse. But the data didn't lie. The Karenta's movements had shifted subtly, like an organism retracting from a source of heat. If we follow them, Kieran said, we might find the heart of this thing. Or we wake something that was never meant to be disturbed. He turned to her, voice steady. We've already done that. The decision wasn't made lightly. Every protocol advised against it. Several of the ship's senior officers threatened resignation. But Kieran gave the order. Aegis Dawn would enter the quarantine zone. No escorts. No signals. Just silence. They slipped through the outer veil of the shroud 2 days later, guided only by gravitational anomalies and bursts of ultraviolet radiation. The stars here looked wrong, bluer, stretched thin like paint across a dying canvas. Instruments failed sporadically. Time seemed to dilate and contract in pulses. And then they found it. The vessel, if it could still be called that, hovered above a dead world, encased in rings of broken satellites and fractured moons. It resembled nothing they had ever seen. Towering spires rose from its hull, each pulsing with internal light. A network of semi-organic tendrils reached out into the void, twitching like nerves. The ship wasn't just alive. It was awake. Kieran convened a select team, Lisa, engineer Vailmarek, linguist Tovacel, and security chief Wren. Together, they took a shuttle toward the surface of the construct. Their approach was met with no resistance. No signals. Only a low-frequency hum that resonated in their bones. Inside, The structure defied logic. Corridors bent upon themselves, spatial orientation shifted at random. They marked their path with quantum beacons, but when they turned back, the beacons were gone. I'm not convinced we're still in the same dimension, Vale muttered, scanning the walls. This place defoed reality. They pressed on, guided by a rhythmic vibration that grew stronger with each step. At the heart of the vessel, they found a chamber that pulsed with light. Suspended in the center was a figure, humanoid, but translucent, composed of shifting patterns of data and light. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It simply existed. Then it spoke, not aloud, but in their minds, all at once. You breach what should not be breached. You awaken what was buried in mercy. Tova gasped, clutching her head. It's in every language. At once. Who are you? Kieran demanded. We are containment. We are the final vault. The architects of silence. Lisa stepped forward. You created Carinth? The figure shifted slightly. We created the barriers. The Carinth are not ours. They were summoned by the echo of disobedience. They're the immune response. Kieran felt cold. To what? To us. The light in the chamber intensified. Images flooded their minds. Galaxies collapsing. Civilizations folding into singularities. Timelines devoured by entropy made manifest. A war fought not across space, but across existence itself. The Carinth had not started it. They had been born from it. As a firewall, a last line of defense. You declared war on what you did not understand, the entity said. You sent your message. We answer with extinction. Vale stepped back, voice trembling. It's not just about survival. It's a protocol, a purge. The entity dimmed. But now, it said, you are here. You have breached the vault, and the deeper silence stirs. Lisa raised her weapon. We didn't come to unleash anything. We came for answers. You came, the voice echoed, and that is enough. The chamber began to collapse around them. The walls peeled back into stars. The shuttle auto-recalled, dragging the team back through shifting corridors of reality bent and buckled. They barely escaped. Back aboard the Aegis Dawn, the crew watched as the structure folded in upon itself and vanished, leaving no trace that had ever existed. But the message was clear. The Carinth were not the apex predator. They were the wardens. The galaxy's deadliest species had not been conquered. It had been locked away. And now, something knew they were coming. End of Section 3. Word count, 1-500. Let me know when you're ready to build out Section 4, or if you want to explore any subplot or character arc in more detail. They returned to a galaxy changed. The Aegis Dawn emerged from the nebulous shroud into a silence deeper than any calmed blackout. Relay stations that once buzzed with data streams were dark. Trade hubs gone dim. Patrol routes abandoned. It was as if the galaxy had paused mid-breath. No Carinth strikes. No reports of vanished colonies. Nothing. But it wasn't peace. Kieran stood before the bridge's primary display, watching a full scan of known concordant space. The results were chilling. Activity levels had dropped by 60%. No battles, no demands, no incursions. Entire fleets reported missing, yet with no sign of attack. It wasn't just military infrastructure. It was life itself withdrawing into shadows. They're pulling back, Lisa said, voice hushed as if afraid to disrupt the quiet. Every species, every stronghold, not because of the Carinth, but because of what follows. Kieran nodded. The galaxy doesn't know what it is, but it feels it. They weren't the only ones to touch the vault. Fragments of its signal had slipped through. Encoded echoes spread through dark energy streams, passed from one sensor array to the next. Some picked it up in dreams, others in flashes of memory. The warning had multiplied without being understood, and that meant they were running out of time. Kieran summoned what remained of the emergency council. Attendance was thin, not due to sabotage or death, though there had been plenty of that, but fear, the kind that paralyzed entire systems. Delegates sent proxies. Some species simply never responded. The Carinth aren't coming anymore, he said when the assembly convened. And that should terrify every one of us. A projection unfolded. A recreation of the vault's final transmission, refined from Lisa's decrypted fragments. A being born of code and light, a voice older than stars. A species that was not a species at all, but a construct, a responsive mistake made long before life as they knew it had evolved. You're suggesting this entity, this containment vault, was holding something worse? Asked Admiral Riveth, eyes narrowed. No, Kieran said. I'm saying it still is. But the seal is cracking. They debated for hours, tactics, countermeasures, the ethical quandaries of using Karen technology or even contacting the Karen themselves. But no solution was clear, because they weren't facing an enemy in the traditional sense. They were facing a consequence, a legacy buried too deep for memory, but close enough to still bleed into reality. When the session ended, Lisa followed Kieran to the observation deck. The stars looked unchanged, but both of them knew better. What if the Karen don't come back? She asked quietly. What if whatever's inside the vault makes them irrelevant? Then we were never really fighting them, he said, just delaying the real war. They had one chance left, to find the source of the protocol, the original signal that initiated the purge, the inciting frequency that had roused the Karen. Somewhere in the archives of forgotten prehistory, encoded in the ruins of civilization erased from every timeline, lay the truth. They needed Tova. The linguist had remained silent since their return, retreating into the cognitive trance chambers deep within the Aegis Dawn's research wing. She spoke now only in riddles, segment of code that looped across dead languages and symbology from extinct empires. Kieran found her seated within a circle of suspended glyphs, her eyes glazed but focused, her fingers conducting symbols through the air. They didn't build the vault, she whispered as he approached. They were told to. The vault is a jail cell, but they didn't forge a key. Who did? Kieran asked, her eyes turned toward him, wide and unblinking. We did. He froze. What are you saying? The signal the Karen responded to, it came from us, or from something we became once in another cycle, a failed ascension. We triggered our own extinction across iterations. It made a twisted kind of sense. Time wasn't linear here. Not in the depths of the shroud. Not at the edge of reality. What if the purge was a recursion? A loop playing out each time sentient life reached a certain threshold? We awaken, we threaten the fabric, and something tries to fold us back in, she said. But each time, we get closer to remembering, closer to breaking out. Kieran stepped back. If that's true, then this war isn't about them stopping us. It's about us refusing to stay buried. Lisa arrived, breath ragged. Kieran, we just intercepted a long-range anomaly near the Pelea's Rift. A structure, drifting, generating temporal distortions, and emitting the same signal as the vault. How big? She shook her head. It's not. It's small. A pod. A seed. Tova whispered. The beginning always follows the end. The Aegis Dawn reached the rift within 48 hours, racing through corridors of bent space and collapsed star paths. The pod drifted there, a lonely fragment of the void, its surface etched with impossible geometry, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat of the universe. As they neared, the crew felt it, something stirring, memories that weren't theirs, visions of futures not lived. Every officer reported déjà vu. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by emotion. Kieran pressed his hand to the pod surface, and it opened. Inside was not a weapon, not a creature, but a single child, human in form, untouched by time. Eyes closed, breathing shallow. Tova stepped forward. This isn't a being. It's a carrier, a convergence point. What is it carrying? Lisa asked. The potential for transcendence or collapse. Kieran didn't move. The child breathed and the stars pulsed with it. This is what we become, he said softly, or what becomes of us. And then the Karen arrived, not in warships, not in formation, but in a single obsidian spire that unfolded from folded space and hovered in stillness. A figure stepped forward. Unlike before, it did not hide behind shadows or voice. It was tall, faceless, draped in robes of semi-sentient matter that writhed like thought itself. You breached the silence, it said. You woke the seed. Kieran faced it. We didn't know. You never do, yet you always return. Then stop us. The figure paused. This time we won't. 1,000 interpretations spun through the air between them. Hope, warning, resignation. You are the virus and the cure, the Karen said. We were guardians once. Now we are witnesses. The spire folded and vanished. The child opened its eyes, and the galaxy exhaled. End of section 4. Word count, 1 for 98. If you like an epilogue or continuation, or want help developing this into a full manuscript or series, I've got you covered.